Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Pål and Ville. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Welcome back, everybody, to yet another fantastic episode of Fintech Daydreaming. We are here again. We've got some interesting guests. We're going to dive deep into the world of interesting books in the financial and banking space. We've got an author with us, a good friend, someone I have been desperate to get onto the podcast for some time. And after a quick interlude, actually, I believe it was two of them at Cybos, we managed to con him into joining us. But as always, I'm Pål Krogdahl. I'm going to be your host for this episode, and I wouldn't do this alone because this is a two-man band. We never do this alone. We always manage to find some way, even when one of us are traveling, and therefore Ville is stuck in a very, very dark, dingy room somewhere else in the world. Where are you, Ville?
I am in Copenhagen, indeed, in a very dark room, and it's Monday morning, 9 o'clock here. So I guess my first thought is that why do we always schedule these recordings in weird times, like Monday mornings or Friday late afternoons? Because, again, it's not really the best time to record. But anyway, here we are in Copenhagen, and I believe you are joining me here in Copenhagen as well later today. So looking forward to a fun week here.
Absolutely. I'm joining you for some Mobi Forum member meeting fun and some deep dive into the comparison of account to account and card payments, which is going to be our next Mobi Forum paper. But to answer your question, Ville, it's because your schedule is an absolute nightmare to deal with. And you seem to have these little pockets of slots, which is even worse than our high profile guests that say, I'm free. When do you want to record? And Ville says, I can't. Why don't we do it on a Friday evening at 6 o'clock when everybody else wants to go out and have a drink?
Yeah, indeed. I guess it's just myself to blame then, but it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. We'll blame you. So sorry, guests, sorry, listeners and watchers for the bad quality of Ville's video and audio, but he's sitting in a hotel because he's traveling yet again. You do not want to see how many air miles he's got on these different airlines, but that's a different discussion as well. On to the subject of today. Like I said, we've got an author with us who has written a book very recently that was published called A New Ethos in Banking. If you're a frequent purveyor of the fintech scene, then I'm sure you already have guessed who it is. But I have with us Rik today, who is going to tell us a little bit about what he's doing in his book. But for those people who maybe aren't fintech gurus, Rik, why don't you introduce yourself, share with our listeners who you are, where you came from, how you got to write a book, and what's your superpower?
No, sure, but before I'd like to know, suppose we schedule this at 6 on a Friday evening. Would the light be so much better from a bar?
Most probably, and we actually have done a couple of episodes beer in hand. So, and we've discussed this of potentially doing a sort of live recording in a after dark type setting in a bar somewhere. So, Rik, you're an expert in setting up.
Better luck
events.
next time.
Exactly.
So my name is Rik Coeckelbergs. The founder, managing director of the banking scene. The banking scene is a network community for the bank industry across Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. I found this really out of my passion for banking more than organizing events, which is for me the necessary evil to get those exciting conversations on banking. And how did I come up building that community is through a LinkedIn group that I set up in the beginning of my career to ask all my stupid innovation in payments questions to very smart consultants. Back in the day, those platforms were extremely engaging, worked very well. And to my surprise, today, that is the world's largest LinkedIn group dedicated to payments on LinkedIn with 140,000 members. And that gave me a flavor, a taste of the value of having a strong network, but also a very good understanding of the superficiality of online networks if you don't meet them in person. Which is why at a certain moment I decided to take it offline. And for 2 years, I combined it with a full-time job at a bank. So it's more of a side hustle. And it's the moment that I got to 330 participants at our annual conference that I decided to make the decision to leave the bank and to spend more time building the banking scene to where we are today. Today, the banking scene has 5 public events, regular executive roundtables, a podcast as well, a blog, and Andrew Forster, innovation catalyst, former VP of research at Visa, is today my head of growth. And with the two of us, we grow the community to hopefully bigger heights in the future. But this year was pretty amazing already. I don't know if you saw Lisa Russell at InnoTribe at Cybos this year. She's an AI filmmaker, and she made for us a 20-minute immersive video last week at the Banking Scene Art Night, which was pretty special. And also our big event in Brussels reached 450 people this year, which was an absolute record. So I hope we can do maybe even better next year, but at least do minimum the same. And as you already mentioned, I also wrote a book, A New Ethos in Banking, Embracing Values and Ethics for a Meaningful Transformation, because I think we should talk much more about meaningful transformations instead of just digital transformations. And the narrative of that book was primarily based on a couple of conferences on the same topic, where we had CEOs and other people talking about their interpretation of ethos in banking, and then many interviews and some desk research, which brought me to the book that was published in March this year.
So ethos in banking, let's sort of open the lid on that. When you talk about ethos in banking, what do you mean by ethos in banking?
Well, I'm not an ethicist, so I didn't want to talk about ethics too much. Ethics stands for what you think is good and wrong. Ethos to me is the interpretation of those ethical principles in the day-to-day behavior. So translating that to an organization, it's what an organization does. It's what it does to demonstrate what it stands for, so to say. So you have all these values, you have probably a mission as well, a mission statement, you have the DNA, the identity of an organization. But if that is not translated in day-to-day behavior, it's just text, it's just a message, and that doesn't work. And the whole idea of the book circles around that banks, if they aren't trusted already, which quite a lot of banks are not yet since the financial crisis, since it's a very complex industry as well. So I try to explain why that trust isn't always there. And then try to make sure that if you build on a very strong ethos, you can gain that trust again, because you start connecting with the customer instead of just connecting with reports that explain what the customer is.
Isn't this a little bit of a conflict, though? If we think about it at a very basic level, banks are for profit. They're companies whose main purpose is to make money, and they make money out of their customers. Their customers deposit money, and then they find some way of making money out of that. At a basic level, that's what banks do.
Yeah.
We're getting to a point where banks traditionally weren't seen as having the customer's best interest at heart. They had their own interest at heart. But as things are moving on, they have to become custodians of trust, very much like you're saying, the ethos.
Yeah.
But are we actually seeing that the banks are actually being able to walk that talk, or are they still just talking the talk?
I think you have quite a few examples that are also walking the talk, and I don't think those two are conflicting. Making a profit also means that you're serving customers. If you don't serve them well, you risk to lose those customers. And I give two very big topics of today on how a bank can be different, and that's sustainability on the one hand, transformation on the other, and technology. And I believe that with the capabilities and possibilities that technology gives us today, the rise of artificial intelligence, that everything can be finally super personalized, both on individual but also on organizational level, I think we finally get the capabilities to start building an identity in digital banking again. And some banks will do much better than others. And if that is what they claim to be, a digital bank, the best digital bank for their customers, and they do that very well, for me, that is also a strong ethos. It doesn't, per definition, need to transfer back to doing the best possible for society, because in that case, yes, you have to give away all your profits. But we are living in a market economy where profits and doing good for the customer should be in balance.
Interesting. So what's the underlying theme running through your book? Is it the fact that the banks, is this a marketing message for the banks? They need to change their marketing message, or is it more about operational transformation or business transformation?
It's more about the second, operational and business transformation. It's about get a good understanding of what you as banks stand for. Make sure that the values that you personally stand for align with that, because otherwise you will not stay happy working for the organization, because then you have conflicting values. That doesn't work. And then make sure that in every decision you take, you think back of those values and make sure that you do whatever you preach. And it also means that in your strategy and the implementation of strategy, you need to keep that into account. It's not always about the numbers, but the numbers will probably follow a good direction. If everyone's aligned, things will run much smoother as well. And if expectations are aligned with the world outside, you will get more trust. It will be much easier to get your message shared, and it will be easier to grow business.
So as a resident banker in this podcast, I need to, of course, push back a little bit on your premise, which was that the banks no longer have the trust of their customers.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the financial crisis was the turning point for that thing to kind of move into the other direction. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit on that? So what happened in the financial crisis that made people lose their trust in banks? And then secondly, how does this look like for a bank when trust disappears? Because again, I would almost argue that in the Nordics especially, the trust never went anywhere. So again, regional differences. But yeah, so what does that look like? What's the turning point?
Well, with the financial crisis, in a lot of countries, banks were blamed for the crisis. Although, well, in a way it was because of the whole risk management, etc. But if you dig deeper into the whole issue, you quickly realize that the foundations of that global financial crisis came from somewhere in the 90s with a changed decision by the American government on providing more living opportunities for the American consumers. But aside from that, because it is a very complex industry that affects us all, when some things go wrong, it's very easy to blame the banks that things have gone wrong. And you come from the Nordics. I'm also sharing the example of Danske Bank, which wasn't a financial crisis case, but it's one that clearly shook the Nordic banking industry as well, and that led to a complete transformation of Danske Bank as a whole. It used to be a symbol of Denmark, of the Danish economy at large, and suddenly it was the evil mastermind of the world that transferred billions of money from Russian oligarchs and all others to Western safe accounts. And what happens when banks lose trust, whether as an industry or an individual bank, is that it takes many, many, many years to change that perception. And that happens when suddenly certain actions are no longer aligned with the values a bank tells us they stand for.
Yeah,
that's what I essentially mean.
Yeah, interestingly, the on your point on Danske Bank, I think what we see also is that out of this crisis of confidence and trust and otherwise with banks, the typical correlation after that seems to be that the banks almost like overinvest in new development and innovation in order to kind of create this almost like compensate for the mistakes that they've done in the past. So as a concrete example, we saw mobile pay being developed by Danske Bank right after that crisis, and it was at least partially it was perceived as a way to give something back to the Danish citizens because they were lacking a person-to-person payment system back then. But yeah, again, have you seen something like this in other parts of the world as well, other banks? Because this again, something good always comes out of this bad with overinvestment in innovation, which sometimes leads to good results.
With the idea of over innovation as such, maybe not that much, but what you saw the coming 20 years is both a strong push from regulators for more regulation to make sure the same problems won't happen again. There was a big push also from fintech to change banking because they were not trusted and because they bring bad customer service, and all of that added up on some. It's very hard to isolate certain cases, of course. So in that respect, if you talk about, well, KBC, they need to be rescued during the global financial crisis in Belgium, KBC Bank. Today, they are, for quite a few years, the most innovative bank in Belgium and probably one of the most innovative on a European and maybe even global scale. That is, I think, another good example. And it's not just that they're the most innovative, but they're, I think, also one of the most profitable ones in Belgium, because they said there will be the best digital bank and they fulfilled that promise. And by doing so, they create certain customer delight as well as high level of efficiency, and combining the two together brings a pretty unique a case where I think the new ethos in banking in their case is to be super good in digital, and that is what they did. That is for me also a good example of a strong ethos in banking. And their new general manager spoke at our art night last week as well, and their whole interpretation of what we should be investing in is intent. That is, I think, a very interesting nuance, because that idea of looking at intent of customers, why they're doing certain things, comes back from the whole evolution of agentic AI, because before that I rarely heard about intent at all.
There's another interesting part to this. It can't just be ethos by itself. Very often you find that there is a play against different forces. You talk about the triangle where ethos is just one of that. So maybe you want to share a little bit more around this. You've got ethos, but you've got two other elements that help to drive this equilibrium, right?
Yeah, you need to have them in balance. There's ethos, there's pathos, and there's logos. And that is not something I invented. That's something from the old Greek times, where logos stands for rational thinking, thinking in terms of numbers, etc. That's what banks are supposed to be very good at. And in the beginning, they were also very good at explaining that. Over the years, banking came completely different, much more complex, very hard to explain. I mean, even a banker today can't explain the entire way of working from a bank at large. There's so much specialization, and rightfully so because of its complexity. So things have kind of gone wrong there. It's very hard to explain what a bank does, and that erodes trust in a way. Then there's Pathos. Pathos stands for the way you feel with your audience. And translating that to the banking industry is, I think, the way that you sympathize, but also that you have empathy with your audience. To what extent do you actually understand the problems they face, and to what extent are you capable of translating that into the right services? Not just your interpretation of what they need, because we most of the time look from our own framework, and our framework, I mean, if we look at the three of us here, is probably a much wealthier framework than the average retail bank consumer, for example. And that's a problem that many banks face, in my opinion, because product developers, by definition, they are the good ones in society. So there we may have seen kind of a mismatch. And I think we are getting back on track to do the right thing. And also there I have an interesting anecdote from KBC, who many years ago joined one of our virtual roundtables to talk about Gate. Gate is their virtual assistant. Existed 1 or 2 years before the launch of ChatGPT. And one of the insights they learned is that by having a smart chatbot that interacts with customers, that tries to answer customers' questions, they also learned that customers are much more willing to share questions they wouldn't share with a human, because they know they will not be, what's the right word in English, that there will be no opinion on them by raising that question. And by doing so, of course, as a bank, you get a much better understanding of what those customers feel, what they do, what they look for, etc. And then the third element is ethos, the way you translate your principles in your behavior, and how that helps you build credibility and trust from the audience. So logos, very rational, be capable of explaining what you do in a very serious logic way. There's pathos, to what extent do you feel with the customer, and there's ethos, to what extent does a customer feel with you? Because trust is not something that you can build, it's something that you can stimulate, but at the end, it's given by an audience to you.
So breaking this down easily for the lesser mortals of us and taking
the non-Greeks.
Yeah, taking the premise of your book, the three sides of this triangle then is, one is very binary. It's the numbers, it's the pure facts, what the bank does.
But today is also to do with financial literacy, etc. as well. So translating those facts into something that's understandable by the average man on the street.
Which is the other side of the triangle, which is the empathy, the customer centricity, the giving the customer the ability to feel safe, secure, and trusted in that binary facts of numbers. And then the last part of that triangle is pulling those two together as a bank to actually demonstrate that you are dealing with these binary elements with that customer centricity in mind.
Yeah.
Am I translating that correctly?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
What do you think, Ville? Does this line to your view of sitting with inside of a bank?
It somehow reminds me of all the different kind of strategy workshops and mission statement workshops that we do in every company, I guess, in banks included. And sometimes you feel a little bit like, how is this really connected to what we do in day-to-day work? So again, how do you handle this disconnect, basically moving from philosophy into practical use of these values? So how do you bridge that gap in your book?
That's almost where I at the end of the book, but essentially it has to do with, you have all those exercises. I've been in those exercises as well, and after 2 weeks, you forget what it was, what was concluded, what the values were, which colors meant what, etc. And that's essentially most of the times the problem. So you need a very strong leadership that bridges it. I can't do that for those organizations. It's a leadership that must do that, and that must also step away from the many short-term targets, etc., which is probably the biggest challenge, because everyone lives with their own interests at mind as well, and somehow you should be capable of overcoming that. Another element that I add in there as well is that you need to make sure that those values are also anchored on a board level, because what you very often see is that with every 4 years, CEO switches, and suddenly the bank starts to have a new DNA, a new identity, and that shouldn't happen, of course. So you need to be capable of thinking that long term and be able to bridge those workshops across multiple years one way or another.
So who's the book
But that's
aimed
tough.
at?
That's very tough, because that also means that, well, the problem most ambitious projects face, leadership changes, and suddenly the project stops or changes as well. And that is something that should be avoided. So you should be somehow find a way to overcome the personal interests for the sake of the company at large. And that requires very strong leadership, in my opinion.
Would this work, Ville, in your bank?
I'm trying not to be cynical.
It's Monday morning. We should ask on a Friday evening.
But who should read the book? Rik.
Yeah. I mean, like my beard. It's like, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Good. Sorry, the network connection really is unstable here, but I hope we are back now. So again, as I was saying, as you may see from, even though I'm in a dark room, the color of my beard is quite gray. Means that I've been also going through a lot of these exercises in many different companies. And again, that's my question before was, how do you actually connect this into day-to-day work? Because sometimes it really feels like when this fails, so you create this value system, this strategy and mission statements, and you might do a good job doing that, but then the day-to-day work is nothing like it. So these two things exist in completely different realities. And
but also then you miss the point of those exercises as well.
Yeah, true.
So that's where essentially problems lies in that case.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, it almost like turns against itself when this disconnect happens, when there is too much distance between how you are working on day-to-day life, and then you have the way what you're communicating that what you should be doing is very different. So this also creates a lot of frustration.
Problem with those exercises very often is also that it is very scripted towards an outcome that has been decided before.
That's true. That's true.
And
yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, and isn't this a general problem? It's not one specific.
Well, you can easily translate to any possible industry.
Yeah.
Maybe I should write 10 more books.
No, but it is though. I mean, this is the old aged problem that a lot of corporations face, is the fact that they want to change, they know they have to change, they know they have to modernize, but there's a cultural inertia that just keeps the bank or the organization drifting in the same way that it has done.
It's not just old organizations. I think every organization faces it one way or another. And for younger organizations, it may just be a lot more brutal than with the old. With the old, you have those exercises and you keep doing the status quo. With the young, you have those exercises and suddenly you decide to go the other direction and you miss half of the employees as well. That's what you see in the old, like maybe fintech or startups. Oh, an idea doesn't work. Let's keep building the company, but in another way. So we make it work just for the sake of the company. That's also an example of where the triangle doesn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
You start with a corporate identity and you build on that, not the other way around. And that's where the mismatch probably lies in a lot of transformation projects as well. They're still the company. And when you talk about ethos, quite a few executives translate in culture, but also in identity. And if you look at it from that point of view, you need to make sure that if Nordea, for example, is doing a strategy exercise, it's still Nordea doing the exercise. So that exercise cannot mean that you completely change the organization, because it's an organization that has been built on history, on people, on events, on all kinds of things that define the future of that organization much more than the exercise itself.
You bring up
the old saying is that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
And this new way of thinking that how do we actually implement the strategy, and while understanding that the culture is much slower to move. Do you talk about that? How do you start to kind of move the culture slower, kind of pulling from this new way of thinking? Are you talking about how do you transform a culture? Strategy is easier to change than a culture.
Not so much. Not so much. I should have actually, maybe for my second book, but the book was more structured first, looking a bit at the history of banking and how trust has been evaporated a couple of times in the history of banking. Then looking at what does that ethos actually mean, their triangle, etc. A couple of cases where banks were blamed for things they weren't the cause of, and then looking at a few opportunities like digital transformation at large and sustainability as an opportunity to redefine ethos. And then a couple of things to keep in mind, and then I end with a possible future that Chris Skinner once asked me to write for the when my son would be 20 years old, and that it was 40. But yeah, the practical script of how to do all that is still on my list for potentially a second book.
We look forward to that second book, absolutely. Yeah. But you mentioned a little while ago an interesting dynamic, which is the shift when it comes to a large incumbent bank versus the shift when it comes to a neobank or a fintech or a very young new organization. So based on your experience working in this field and coming to the point of writing the book, where do you see this transformation being more successful and sustainable? Is it in the incumbent large banks, or is it in the fintechs, even though the fintechs almost self-explode?
Yes. I think it maybe because of the leadership, it may be easier for incumbents because they can take a distance from the organization, and observe it from a distance as well, where in a fintech or a startup, the founder is also the one who created it. It's his child, and transforming a child is close to impossible because it's like leaving that child is very hard. So in that respect, I would say it should be easier from an incumbent if it has the right governance and it is and has proper leadership, both from a board as an executive board level point of view, that you have the right people that take those principles at hand to build that new ethos. Like, for example, we saw at Danske Bank, it wasn't just investing in new innovations, but they completely changed their leadership as well. Hopefully for the better. I haven't evaluated anymore. Maybe Ville can, without being too brutal about his competitors, share a bit more about it. But I found that a very interesting case. I spoke to them anonymously, and they said like they've been building much more on digital transformation now, but without explicitly sharing it. Really, and the idea behind it was like, we want to prove that we are doing the right thing, and you do that by showing what you can instead of just talking what you can. And they completely transformed the leadership, I think rightfully so, because after that incident, there were quite some hiccups with former ABN AMRO board members as well that needed to be replaced, even though they weren't even 1 year on their chair. But I think altogether, Danske Bank is a different bank than what it was years ago.
This is Fintech Daydreaming, and we do some daydreaming from time to time. So let's let you do some daydreaming, talking about the banks and transformation and your book and your work. If we gave you a magic wand and you could daydream the perfect bank into existence or the perfect transformation, what is the first thing you would build?
Oh, in this moment, I regret not having thought about the questions before. I think I would build a bank that builds credibility, trust, and loyalty through long-term thinking with the client. And that's a loyalty that sticks much longer. And then they also like have the time to prove that is effectively working. But I think there's so much opportunity in helping customers and making a profit that we haven't investigated yet, or not enough, because of the many other priorities that financial institutions have today, both on a transformation and a regulation and a compliance point of view, etc. That sometimes that long-term vision on what digital can mean to the client for good is often ignored, in my opinion. And I think with AI and the possibilities of artificial intelligence and the new technologies, we will see quite a shift. It makes me kind of nervous and a bit angry as well, reading all the reports on how AI is transforming banking and seeing all the examples, and all the examples are about efficiency. I recently spoke to an executive in a bank who was proud to share that their AI is completely transforming their lending process. And when I asked how, they said, yeah, now customers can get their decision in days and no longer in weeks. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still the same process. That transformation of the process, instead of just looking at efficiency, but also effectiveness, looking at that bigger picture in terms of journeys and not just in terms of process, that is something where we haven't seen the end yet, in my opinion. And today, with both possibilities of AI in a near future, 3-5 years, agentic AI, there is quantum computing coming up that will drive those AI things much more efficiently to make it more democratic for all, in combination with maybe even blockchain technology that will ensure that those AI bots can be trusted as well. I think that will completely transform the bank and make the bank look very different from how we look at banking today. But that is, of course, in 10-year future maybe, and something that I cannot predict right now.
Speaking of new technologies and banks and trust in the system and building a better bank, why is it that these things are so specific to banks? So another example of this.
Well, they're not.
So again, look at what's happening in the crypto world. It always seems to go in cycles, and they never learn anything from the previous crash. And yet people trust these things, at least in the bubble where the crypto bros tend to live. So I mean, why do people hold these industries in different standards, I guess is my question.
I think there you can make a reference with the Wild West. The Wild West, the American dream, is what we in Europe understood the Wild West was about. And then we got there and we realized that it was a country full of criminals. There was no law, and there was everyone did whatever they wanted, etc. And that is a bit what we still see today in crypto. Banks are heavy regulated. For every word they use to make marketing, they need an approval, etc. It's super complicated. And in the world of crypto, you still have influencers that promise massive amounts of profit, even though it's not always there, but they don't ask approval, or they don't need to ask approval. It's unregulated, and that's they explain it in a very easy way by not properly explaining it. They don't need to share, or they don't share the risk. They only share the opportunities, and that is very appealing to the average customer, or to the average consumer, let's say. So if you have cycles of 4 years, that means for 3 years, you can prove with your recent history how profitable it is to invest in crypto, to invest in yet another crypto hype or whatsoever. And they don't look any further in the past to see what damage it can bring. So I think it's mostly about that, is the lack of regulation that makes it very appealing. And Ponzi schemes have always been there. And I'm not saying that crypto is a Ponzi scheme. I used to say, but I'm not saying it anymore. But
I can say it.
yeah, tricking people has always been there. They always find something. I think that's the main reason. And why always banks? Banks touch everyone's life. And because we look so closely to it, of course, we see all the small change as well. Every industry is completely transforming, but for us, it's something far, far away because we live in our own ivory tower and we just consume what others are building. But I can imagine that in the chemistry industry or retail industry or whatever, they're having similar conversations like we have.
I actually came across a very interesting LinkedIn post the other day. I can't remember who it was that posted it, but the title was "Crypto is the new snake oil." So, maybe continuing the discussion from there. But we are running out of time, as we always do on these podcast episodes. Fantastic discussions. Rik, is there anything that you would have liked us to have asked you, but we didn't?
Yeah, there's one thing that I start noticing after publishing my book. And I don't know if you're aware, but quite a lot of banks start to bring compasses to their work. So I assumed that you would ask me, why did all those bankers bring their compass to work? But maybe that's for another episode.
I think you need to expand on this. You mean
apparently after my book,
west?
They all started to look for their moral direction. Which is why they brought that compass with them.
I like that. And actually, that leads me into another one. We always ask our guests if they want to bring a good joke to the podcast episode. Ville normally does it at the beginning. I do it at the end, just to lighten the mood as we round off. So, Rik, do you actually have a joke for us?
One more.
Yes.
Let me have a look at my jokes again. Why did the customer switch banks?
No idea.
His bank talked about purpose, but the other one actually had one.
Okay. We'll take it.
That fits quite nicely with your book. Absolutely. Yes. Ville, anything you want to add before we close off?
No, I think you're going to be seeing both of us, me and Paul, in many conferences in the upcoming weeks. So looking forward to meeting as many of you listeners as possible, as always. Always happy to talk to fans and listeners about the podcast, and of course anything else if you want to just have a chat. So looking forward to having these fun discussions in the upcoming weeks.
Absolutely, yes. Rik, if people want to get in contact with you and ask you some more questions and talk about your book, how can they reach you?
They can easily find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way. But they do need to make sure that they write the family name properly. And Rik is R-I-K, not R-I-C-K. But aside from that, it should be pretty straightforward to find me on LinkedIn through the banking scene or either my personal name or one of my conferences. Yeah.
Fantastic. Wonderful. And the same with us. If you've enjoyed this episode of Fintech Daydreaming and you're still with us, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. And like I always say, if you want to do us just one small favor, just share the podcast with one of your friends, one of your colleagues who you think might be interested, because we really like to grow our listener base. And the more listeners we get, the more eager we are to bring you more guests, more discussion points, and interesting things that are happening around the fintech world. We will be back in 2 weeks' time. Yes, we haven't reached the end of this season yet. Christmas is very quickly coming. If you celebrate Christmas, we have to remember now these days about all the different things in the world. But if you are celebrating, then yes. Otherwise, it will be the end of the year. But until then, this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.